Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to the White House. Yes, you're here, and we're delighted to have you. Today, we're welcoming 80 youth leaders who are joining us from all over the United States. And we also want to welcome all of you who are joining us through the live stream of this morning's event. My name is Kim Leary, and I'm an advisor to the Council on Women and Girls, and also a Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellow on sabbatical from the Cambridge Health Alliance and the Harvard Medical School. And within the Council, I have the pleasure of leading initiatives on diversity in STEM fields and on empowerment for women and girls of color. Now, we've called today a hackathon because we want to capture the spirit of creative problem solving and customized solutions. That's a part of hacking a problem. And even though we're not going to be using computers today, that same spirit is going to infuse the work we're going to do on leadership and also on policy. And by the end of the day, we hope that we've demystified policy and that the work that you're doing can become more fully your own as you hack it. So I'll be working with you for the whole of the day, but right now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett is a graduate of Stanford University, where I understand she majored in psychology. She also graduated from the University of Michigan and the law school there. And now, as you know, she is a senior advisor to President Obama. She's chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls and assistant to the president for the offices of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs. Throughout her professional career, and especially as a part of this administration, she has been a champion for working families, a tireless advocate for girls and young women, and also for boys and young men. And she's passionate about the health of our communities and opening opportunity for all. Really, Ms. Jarrett is a creative and generative leader, so please welcome her to our hackathon today.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everyone. We are just delighted to have you here. Welcome to the White House. I never get tired of saying that. I just like to say it all the time. Anybody been here before? Oh, all right. Well, for you second or third timers, welcome back. But to those who haven't been here before, we're particularly thrilled to have you here together. When we use the term hackathon, as Kim literally said, usually it's technology, at which point they completely lose me because I'm not a tech person at all. But on policy, that I love. And I think we are so delighted, particularly to have young leaders here, because we believe that change happens best outside of Washington, and particularly with the young folks. As the president always says, you are the future, you have the best ideas, you are so much more talented than we were when we were your age, and we want to lift you up and really encourage you as you leave here today to focus on ways in which you can take this experience back to your communities and encourage everybody to engage. Our country has come a long way, and we've been having a lot of anniversaries over the last couple of years. The 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act will be celebrating next week. The president was down in Selma talking about the history of that. 50th anniversary of Medicare and Medicaid. A lot happened 50 years ago, and we have made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. And we want to make sure that every young person gets that fair shot. No matter where you come from, no matter what your zip code is, no matter what your experience in life as a young person, we want you to be able to grow up and achieve your dreams. And you all are role models for so many people. And just looking around this room, I'm so proud of you all. I really am. But this is just the beginning. And we have a long way to go, and we need your help to do it. And so the issues that you're going to tackle today are top priorities of the administration. And so I hope that puts a little pressure on you, because we're really counting on you to help. And we've gotten it started. In fact, many of you probably have already participated in our It's On Us campaign. Has anybody, tell me if anybody's at least heard of it? A couple of people. All right, well, by the time you leave here, everyone's going to know a lot about that. What we know now is that 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted while in college. And some of the conduct that leads to that begins far earlier than that in high school. And there are a host of reasons for why it happens. And we're doing a lot of analysis of that, and we're encouraging everything from parents to talk to their children and teach respect for women and teach women respect for their body. And in my personal opinion is there's an awful lot of drinking that's going on that begins in high school and continues on into college. But in order to change the culture, everybody has to participate. So it's not just enough that we have stepped up since President Obama has been in office to put additional responsibility on schools, colleges, and universities to ensure a safe environment for the young people. When you send your children off to school, it is not with the expectation that they will be in harm's way. So we're going to be vigilant about that. We had a task force that I chaired together with Lynn Rosenthal in the Vice President's office, where we engaged a whole range of stakeholders around what could we do to end sexual assault on college campuses. And what came out of that was probably the biggest thing that we could get across is that everybody has to take responsibility, which is why we said it's on us. It's on all of us. It's on the administrators of the school to create a culture that's conducive, but it's also up to students to say to one another, is that the kind of a community we want to be, where women and men too are in harm's way? And so we want your help on how we can continue and improve upon that initiative and help change the culture. And cultures don't change necessarily overnight, but peer pressure is tremendously important. And so we're really counting on you to help with that. Another issue that we care a lot about, in fact, just last week we had a conference here focusing on the school to prison pipeline and the effect that school discipline has on that. Disproportionately, boys and girls of color are disciplined, they're suspended, and they are expelled. We have a whole initiative for boys and young men of color called My Brother's Keeper, and a part of that is to say, what can we do to make sure that young people stay in school? And I have never understood the theory behind expelling or suspending somebody when they misbehave in school, because a big part of what they want to do is get out of school, right? I want them to stay in school. And so we know that the pipeline from being expelled or suspended from school into the juvenile justice system, into the adult penal system is like a straight line. And one way to break that cycle is to keep people in school. And so what can we do? And we came up with some great ideas, which we will certainly share with you and get your feedback on it, to try to encourage teachers and administrators and parents to keep the children in school and break that cycle. And then we're also passionate about getting young people interested in science, technology, and engineering and math. Any of you interested in those fields? I'd like to see more hands go up. Well, you don't have to pretend. You don't have to pretend. But clearly, given the importance of technology, given the growth industries that we're seeing of the future, encouraging young people to develop an interest, particularly those of you who may have the aptitude, but you've never really exercised that muscle the way Kim certainly has and has achieved so well, is to encourage getting people interested in this field and taking the kind of courses that you need to prepare yourself for that. And there's some fascinating work going on around the country, actually, figuring out how to change curriculum so that young people, particularly women who may not have necessarily thought they were interested in those fields, you develop courses that are more likely to be attractive to them at the entry level, and then hopefully it grows from there. I was out with Kim in Silicon Valley about a month ago, because what we find is that a lot of the tech companies do not have diversity that reflects our country. Yes, shaking your head, no, I know, it's not so good. And so we brainstormed all kinds of ways of encouraging them to be more inclusive, because we actually believe diversity is a strength, and businesses will do better, particularly in a globally competitive world, if their workforce and their management reflects diversity. You're going to think better. I mean, we believe that right here in the White House, that you want to surround yourself with people who have different ideas than you, challenge you, make sure that you've thought everything through as thoroughly as you can, and you can't do that if you're just talking to people who think just the way you do. So getting outside of the box is important. So finally, the one thing I want to say to you is that this is an opportunity for you to get to know each other, because you are from all over, and we want to make sure that you walk out of here having made new friends. And one of my regrets when I was your age, and I think about my time, particularly in college, is that I kind of had developed my circle of friends, and then I stayed with that circle of friends. And the advantage of being together with a group of people who don't know one another is that you can develop new networks of friendships, and you will always remember this day. Even those of you who've been here before, you will always remember, I hope, this day that you were here together. And if you see each other in the days and weeks and months and years ahead, I hope you will reflect back on this and consider it to have been a really terrific experience. I also want to give, on closing, a final shout out to Ron, where's Ron? Oh, okay. Ron Heifetz, who's here from Harvard and who's focusing obviously on issues that are important to us in this room and will be participating. And his son, who I just hired to be my speechwriter. I saw him, but I don't have my glasses on. There you are. There's David there. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Kim. Enjoy the day. Push us. Push each other. Think hard and think fast. And hopefully, when you come up with suggestions and recommendations and solutions, and then you have the thrill, I hope, of seeing them put to action both here and also back home, you'll think that this was a terrific experience. So again, I'm really proud of you. We expect big things from you. We're going to run through the finish line in the President's fourth quarter, as we call it, but then we're going to be turning the baton over to you. So step up. You've earned it, and you'll be terrific at it. All right, take care, everybody. Kim.
Wasn't that terrific? A wonderful way to begin today. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Kalila Harris, who is the Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Kalila.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, so now I'm going to reverse the initial rule that I gave you. Whenever you go to conferences or whenever you start class or a semester, what's the rule on cell phones? Off, put them away. So let's pull them out. Take them out, take them out. If you're on Twitter, pull up your Twitter account. We're going to make this day as interactive as possible. You may have seen the hashtag so far, but if not, we are using hashtag WHYouthLead. We will have a stream rolling of the hashtag, but what we would like you to do in this moment is to tweet an introduction of yourself, let the world know who's in the room with us, tell us where you're in school or where you're from, or both if you can fit it into your 140 characters. So if you will, in this moment, oh, there's the stream, hashtag WHYouthLead, hashtag WHYouthLead, and tweet us who you are, where you're from. Shout out your university if you're in school. And with that said, while you're doing that, I'll just note some of the folk in the room. We have Campus Queen from Morgan State University. We have Miss New Jersey 2014. We have several Student Government Association presidents. We have young people who attend community colleges, who attend four-year universities, who are working on their graduate degrees or their doctorate. We have young people here from California, Colorado, Florida, Georgia. We have Brooklyn in the house, had to say that. And so, as Valerie said, it is critical that you all get to know each other and expand your network. Leadership is not an isolated process. It can feel that way sometimes, but the best leaders have a strong network who they can rely on and reflect with about their practice. I also want to say hello to some of our friends here in the room. We have Dr. Melissa Harris Perry from Wake Forest University, who's here with some of her students and fellows. We're so delighted to have them. She is considering taking this work to Wake Forest, and we hope that she and her team will get a lot out of today. I also want to say hello to some of our other guests. We have Marco Davis, who's Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. We have Dr. Quincy Brown, who's a fellow with NSF and a professor at Bowie State University. So you're going to be meeting people all day who are deeply committed to this work and who are policy experts. And so we hope that they will help you along as you hack policy. Last but not least, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership and the King Hussein bin Talal Senior Lecturer in Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. He has also authored many, many books on leadership and really has a special treat for you today. He's going to give you a session on adaptive leadership, which is a transformative method of leadership, not transactional, which means, if I do this, then that will happen, but transformative. How do we move from one place to another with a goal in mind? And so with that said, I hope our Twitter feed is blowing up and that we trend this morning, but I want to introduce you to Dr. Ron Heifetz. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
It's a real pleasure to be hanging out with you today. Ordinarily, I would be wandering around, but because of the video, I'm pinned down behind this podium, so you'll have to forgive the distance. I want to take you on a journey from thinking about things to prepare you for the course of the day, which is taking action about things. And I want to begin on the thinking about things side. There are a lot of fields of study. Many of you are already engaged in college or in graduate school in deep inquiry. There are many fields of study that are fairly mature areas of study, like engineering or economics, or where I started my training in medicine. And in these areas of study that we could call mature disciplines, people agree on all sorts of basic terms of reference. When you talk with a physicist, and two physicists talk, they know what they mean when they use basic terms of reference, like force or power, when they use terms of measurement, meters, and so forth. There are, however, two different ways in which people normally use language. People use language in expert, precise ways, analytical ways, and people also use language in everyday, colloquial, or poetic kind of ways. So a physicist may be at a party and may talk about how a friend is a real force of nature. And when they're using that term, force of nature, they're not using the term in the precise analytical way that they would if they were in the laboratory. In the laboratory, they would be using the word force as equal to mass times acceleration. And that's not what they mean when they talk about a person being a force of nature. So in every field of study that has become mature, people already agree on how to think about basic terms of reference. Two economists might disagree, particularly around this building. They may disagree pretty violently on what's the best policy, but they agree on all sorts of basic terms of reference, what the meaning of average cost or marginal utility, price, on all sorts of basic concepts are already established. But the area of thinking about leadership's not like that. If you think about leadership and you use basic vocabulary, words like leadership, power, influence, authority, management, follower, citizen, real basic, critical terms of reference, you read different authors and they use the same words in very different ways. Even sophisticated authors, even authors in different universities. Some authors will use the same words in what I would consider to be internally contradictory ways, which generates and helps to generate more confusion. So in thinking about leadership, which is something I hope you do for the next decades of your life, I want to introduce you to an area of practice, an area of life that's not yet mature. It's not an area where people are using words in commonly accepted ways. And it puts an extra demand on you and on me to come up with ways to use these words that are more precise and have more clarity and provide then more analytical power when you look out into the world and try to analyze events. So what I'd like to do today is to share with you three key sources of confusion and then three key insights about how to think about leadership. And towards the end of my conversation with you, we'll begin to look at what the practical implications of these insights might be. The first key insight is that people tend to equate leadership with personality. We think that being a leader means having the right stuff. And only a few gifted people are born with the right stuff. And if I don't have the right stuff, well, then leadership's not something for me. But actually, when you analyze it more closely and you look at it more scientifically, what we find is that there is no secret sauce. There is no one constellation of characteristics that defines, quote, leadership. Indeed, when you look at people who have become extraordinary leaders in society, and you really take a look closely at their track record, nobody bats 1,000. People in the practice of leadership fail all the time. In fact, they fail a lot of the time. Like a fabulous hitter in baseball, you only get on base, if you're really great, 1 out of 3 times. So that means 2 out of 3 times you never even get on base. Well, the failure average in leadership is pretty high because leadership is a difficult sport. It's a difficult activity. So when we look at somebody, even with extraordinary gifts and talent and extraordinary education, and then a lot of luck of circumstance, and you look at somebody who happened to emerge at a particular amazing moment in history to be decisive in history, somebody like Winston Churchill, for example, you would say, well, if you really look closely, they provided extraordinary leadership at a moment in time when Britain and Europe faced the onset of Nazi Germany and didn't know how to respond. But if you look at Winston Churchill 20 years earlier, when he was head of the Navy in Britain, and Britain's Navy was pretty powerful, the British Empire ruled the seas, he was a disaster. He made decisions that led to the catastrophic deaths of more than 100,000 people in wrong-headed battles. And moreover, when the war ended in 1945, the British people immediately kicked him out of office because his attitudes, which were perfect for the war, were actually not fitting the moment after the war. Winston Churchill wanted to hold on to the British Empire. He believed in the British Empire. But by 1945, the British people were tired of empire. They were tired of what it cost them to be spread out all over the world, fighting wars and picking fights that they no longer wanted to fight. They were ready to give up the empire. And so they tossed Churchill out. So would you say, well, Churchill was a great leader? I don't draw a bottom line on anybody's career. Because when you look closely at anybody's life story, you find that they practiced leadership maybe in their family, but not in their job. Maybe they practiced some leadership in their community, but not in their family. And that even somebody who practiced leadership in their professional life only did so on some issues and at certain moments in time. And there were other issues and other moments in time where they didn't practice much or offer much or provide much leadership at all. So when we begin to then think about leadership as a practice, something you do rather than something that you are by nature, then we can begin to free ourselves up to examine more closely and analyze what made somebody successful. What did they do in a particular moment in time? What was their strategy? How did they think about purpose being realized in a particular challenging context? How did they move? What were their tactics? How did they analyze and read and diagnose the situation? And then we can capture lessons for the practice of leadership for something that you do in life when the moment and opportunity calls on you to do so. And then we don't have to engage in what I consider to be a real injustice, drawing bottom lines on people. She's a real leader. He's really not. Because what I find as I've had the opportunity over the last 32 years to work with lots of people all over the world, from heads of governments, presidents and prime ministers. The Secretary General of the United Nations was a student of mine. I was with him just a few months ago at the UN, as well as lots of people at grassroots, people who are providing leadership in schools, in classrooms, in their community, in neighborhoods, in their families, in startup businesses, in nonprofit organizations, demonstrating on the street in Indonesia. What you find is that people practice leadership sometimes. And that frees us up in a strange sort of way. The myth of you got to have the right stuff is actually debilitating to a society. And I think that's what President Obama and Valerie Jarrett have been trying to say, that leadership can't simply come from a few people who have magical, charismatic powers. It can't come from just a few people on high. If we relegate our societies or our families or our communities to a chronic state of dependency, where everybody's waiting for the magic person to arrive, then we're going to be waiting for a very long time and festering with our problems. I think when we really look more closely at it, what we find is that the great leaps of progress happen in small incremental moments because a lot of people put their shoulder to the wheel and work hard at making it happen. And then occasionally a dramatic person comes along and catalyzes that moment. And then because of the way we write history books, the history is written about them, but not about all the people who really made it happen. So this year, for example, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Selma. And for many of you, that's a very important moment in history. For all of us, that's a very important moment in history. But when you look closely at Selma, it really wasn't essentially about King or even his close group of collaborators. It was a lot of people starting on the ground in 1961, 3 years before the demonstrations began, where a Reverend, Fred Reese, a school teacher, said, we really ought to start mobilizing people to register to vote. And where he tried to get people to start voting. But of course, they came up against a wall, as many of you have seen in the movie. You'd try to go to the courthouse, the county courthouse, to register to vote, and you couldn't get through the system. So then, 2 years later, a dental hygienist, a young woman, Marie Foster, she said, let's start having a class for people to help prepare them for those tests so they can run the gauntlet. And Marie Foster happened to, her office, her dental hygienist office, was right above a couple of people, Sam and Amelia Boynton, who were civil rights organizers at the time, and they helped her start this class. And so starting in 1963, they started having a class. Well, so when King and his colleagues were looking for a town where they could mount demonstrations, it was a town that had to have a particular set of characteristics. It had to have a sheriff that if you provoked well enough, smartly enough, you could provoke that sheriff to react in a brutal way. And the strategy was, if we could unleash the hidden brutality of racism and pipe it into people's living rooms all over the country, maybe we can then generate the general political will in the country to move Washington. So they came to Selma and they saw, well, Selma's already got these people working the problem. There was another young man, 22-year-old young man, Bernard Lafayette, who came to town, one of the young people in King's organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he started to try to persuade people. But the middle class didn't want to take the risks, and he kept pushing. And then finally one day, he got beat up by a policeman, and blood got all over his t-shirt, and he realized, I'm going to keep this bloody t-shirt on. And then he walked around for a couple of days, continuing to try to talk to the teachers, the middle class in Selma, saying, with his bloody T-shirt. And the bloody T-shirt began to get people upset. Look what they're doing to our youth. And at that point, you began to galvanize attention. So by the time Martin Luther King, Dr. King, and his colleagues came into town and searching for the right city, it was already ripe. It was a situation that had been ripened by a lot of people already on the ground. So leadership in mobilizing progress on really important and tough problems, the kind of problems that you're looking at today, problems of violence against mainly women, but sometimes men, the problems of boys and sometimes girls misbehaving in school and then getting kicked out and getting treated sort of with such an extreme response that it sets them down a path of self-destruction and social destruction. Or access to higher education in engineering and science. You look at those tough issues. Those aren't issues that are going to be solved simply by people on high. People here in the White House are working really hard on it, and people in the Congress are working very hard at it. And people in state houses all over the country are working pretty hard on those issues. But ultimately, those issues are going to be moved forward because there are people on the ground making it happen. Because that's really where change happens, on the ground. So the first idea I want to pose to you is that leadership is much more usefully examined as a practice, something you do. And you do it when the situation's called for. You do it when you're trying to tackle these kinds of hard problems. There are a lot of days when you don't need to be practicing leadership. There are a lot of days when what's called for is simply doing your job with competence and expertise. I started off in medicine, and every day in medicine we save lives. But it didn't require leadership. It's just required, authoritative expertise, doing your job right, doing your job well. So the second big insight I want to share with you is that a lot of people tend to think about leadership as power and influence and position. They mistake the tools of leadership for the work of leadership. The work of leadership is about getting important work done in a community, mobilizing progress on the tough challenges facing that community so that people can thrive in a tough and challenging and changing world. That kind of work, we call it adaptive work, because it's kind of like an organism in a changing environment that either has to develop new capacity or it's going to perish. And the development of new capacity, the development of new cultural capacity, where people think in new ways, where they operate in somewhat new ways, where their identity evolves so that they think about themselves in new ways. That kind of work, that adaptive work, is not the same as technical problem solving. There are a lot of problems in life, that don't require any leadership. All the problems that had to be solved for you to get here today, all the problems that had to be solved to feed you at lunchtime today, for these lights to be working today. When you think of the vast number of problems that are being solved right this moment so that we can just sit here peacefully and hang out. Somebody's manning a complex grid of electric generators somewhere. Somebody's making sure the wires don't break. Somebody's making sure that all the security around this building is handled so that we don't have to be frightened. Because this is a potentially frightening place if you see it as a target. But we don't have to think about that because there are a lot of people with enormous expertise who are doing their jobs right. So there are a lot of problems humanity faces every day that are expert problems. We call them technical problems because they're within our know-how. They're known problems. And we've developed all the ways needed, the systems, to fix and solve those problems. Those kinds of problems don't really require leadership. They require authoritative or managerial expertise. You're trained to do the job, you do the job with a good heart and with good skill, with integrity. But there are some problems we face in life that you can't fix for people. In medicine, we faced a lot of problems like that. Sometimes the problems were completely technical. A child would come to you with an ear infection. You could look inside their ear, give them some penicillin, and 5 days later, they'd be cured. But there are a lot of problems in medicine that come bundled, that are partly technical and amenable to expert solutions, but they're partly adaptive. They require the patient or the family to change how they do things. So, for example, people my age, I'm in my 60s, often develop heart disease. And they may come to the hospital with heart disease, and the hospital will, and the doctors will do all sorts of tests, beautiful, exquisitely engineered tests, where you can look inside the heart. And then if the person has clogged up arteries, they might take that person to surgery. And again, with exquisite integrity and expertise, they'll put the patient to sleep and open up the chest. Probably none of you have yet had an opportunity to watch somebody's chest opened up and to see what it's like inside, but it's pretty inspiring. First time I saw a chest, we call it cracked open. I know it sounds a little brutal, but that's what it's like. It's a bone. And you open that bone and you open up the chest. The first time I saw it, I almost fainted. But the second time I saw it, I just got goosebumps all over. Because it's just a miracle to see the heart beating there inside somebody's chest. And almost as miraculous as that heart is watching the teamwork of that medical team surrounding that patient in the middle of the night, trying to give that person another chance to live. And working sometimes under a microscope, because when they stitch those vessels into the heart, you can't even see those stitches, because it's microscopic thread. And after working as quickly as they can, they finish all their work, and the heart, which is stopped, they shock it with some electricity. And all of a sudden, it starts beating again. You know, it's just the most wondrous thing. And then the doctors close up the chest. After all of that effort, after whole industries that have developed to give that person another chance, the doctor walks into the patient's room and says, "We've done our part of the job, but the rest of the job is yours. You've got to start eating better. You've got to stop smoking. You've got to get exercise. You've got to stress yourself out less. Start spending a little bit more time breathing and meditating and praying and being a person, being a human being." Every single patient after cardiac surgery gets that sermon. What percentage of people do you think do their piece of the work? What's your guess? A third? Any other guesses? Huh? 5%? Anybody more hopeful than that? Huh? Half? You know, in America, it's about 20%. Although I was giving a seminar at Johns Hopkins a few years ago, and the chief of surgery, she said, "No, it's not 20%, it's 0%. The 20% are lying." But I think she just had a bad day. The point is, it's easier to fix the heart than it is to change the human heart. It's real hard to get people to change the habits of a lifetime. And some of you yourselves, you know, you struggle yourselves with your own habits. It's hard. You know, we learn to eat because of the ways our mothers and sometimes fathers loved us with food. And every time we're a little stressed, every time we're grown up, we want just a feel a little bit close to that love again? There's that smell of that food that Mama cooked us. So when you say to somebody, well, change the diet, it turns out not to be such a quick and easy change to make. You know, the doctor may think, come on, I did my thing, you do your thing. In fact, doctors get so frustrated with patients that they don't even call it a medical failure. They call it a compliance failure. They blame the patient. They call it a compliance failure rate because doctors don't want to have anything to do with it. Doctors get frustrated with patients the way teachers get frustrated with students. Because no teacher, when they start off at 23 years old working in a school, is burnt out and cynical. But after 10 years of not knowing how to fix this problem, they start getting burnt out and cynical, and then they don't want to own the problem, so they blame the patient, they blame the kid, they blame the family, they blame the community. They start developing really harsh, cynical attitudes. But as some of you know, if you look deep into your own heart, cynicism is a product of despair. It's, in a way, a psychological solution to the problem of coming up once over and over again with failure. So the second key insight is that leadership isn't about power and influence. It's about the work to be done. And the work to be done usually lies in the hearts and minds of people, because the adaptive challenges, unlike the technical problems, are problems in which the people themselves are the problem. And therefore, the people are the solution. You have no solution if you don't somehow help get inside the hearts and minds of people and help them rethink what their life is about and what are they doing with themselves or with their families or with their neighbors or with their own bodies. That's really hard work. Much harder work even than surgery or engineering. So the third key insight that I want to share with you is that another common assumption is that leadership is the same as authority. If you read a newspaper or even most books about leadership, people will talk about the leadership of the country, the leadership of the school system, the leadership of a business, the leadership of an agency, when they really mean people in high positions of power or authority. We know intuitively that leadership's not the same as authority because we complain all the time about the lack of leadership from people in positions of authority. We say, the leadership isn't exercising any leadership. And we sort of all know what we mean by that. But if we were more precise in how we think, what we would really say is people in high positions of power or authority aren't exercising any leadership. So when we begin to distinguish leadership from authority, from managerial position or political position of power, we can begin to see that there are a lot of people practicing leadership without any authority, like Bernard Lafayette or Marie Foster, like some of you have already begun to do with your neighbors or friends or colleagues in school. There are a lot of people practicing leadership who haven't waited for the coach to call them into play. They haven't waited to be elected or appointed or promoted. I've worked with a lot of people in high positions of power, and a lot of them spent a lot of years sort of punching the ticket, waiting for their turn, with the illusion that once I finally get there, then I'm going to practice leadership. And then what happens is they finally get there and they realize, whoa, there's so much I can't do here. One of my mentors, he wrote the foreword to my first book, founded the Kennedy School, wonderful man named Richard Neustadt, worked for, was one of President Obama's predecessors, President Harry Truman. And Harry Truman said to to Dick Neustadt. Dick was an assistant. He said to Dick Neustadt in late 1952, right before Dwight Eisenhower was going to become president. You know, after the election, but before the inauguration. And Eisenhower, as many of you know, was this extraordinary general who coordinated the most extraordinary set of military activities in human history, the most complex logistical and strategic initiatives in retaking Europe, beginning with the invasion of Normandy. Truman said, thinking about Eisenhower's nickname was Ike. He said, poor Ike. He'll sit here at this desk and he'll say, do this and do that, and nothing will happen. It's amazing. You get into that cockpit and you start pushing buttons and pulling levers, and you realize they're not attached to nearly as much. Somebody took out the transmission. Having high positions of authority gives you a lot less leverage than you think. Now, President Obama knew that from the beginning because he started off as a community organizer. But a lot of people don't know that. They wait. They keep waiting to finally lead, maybe someday when they get to the big job. And only then discover kind of a rude awakening that it's real tough there. So when we begin to distinguish leadership from authority, we can begin to do three things, three really important things. And I want you to think about all these three things for the next 10 years. The first thing is we can begin to examine what does it take to provide leadership from a position of authority. Maybe having the authority position is a bit of a straitjacket. Maybe it gives you a lot of tools and a lot of power, but maybe it also gives you constraints. Maybe it limits you. Why does it limit you? Well, if you think about it a little bit, what I think you would discover is that when you have a high position of power, high position of authority, how'd you get there? You got there because there are a lot of people looking to you. You're the go-to person. What does it mean to be the go-to person? It means there are a lot of people with a lot of expectations that you're supposed to deliver results to them. Well, now what happens if you got a lot of people 360 degrees around you, all expecting delivery of results on their agenda, but they're not all the same agenda? And all of a sudden you're being pulled in 360 different directions. And if you go in one direction, you're going to upset people in another direction. And before you know it, you discover you're kind of in this spider's web. And you're casting about, looking for what's the leverage I have when no matter what direction I go, I'm going to upset some of the people who are looking to me to be their big person. So having the authority position is actually an enormous set of resources and power. You can convene people and get them to work. But rarely can you just simply tell them what to do and make change happen, any more than a cardiac surgeon can say, all right, now you, come on, you know, I did my work, now you do yours, and think that's going to produce a result. So when we distinguish leadership from authority, we can begin to analyze what does it take to lead from a position of authority. And in the books that I've written, you've seen one chapter from one of my books. If you get a chance to look at the rest of the book, it tries to begin to spell out concrete ways, tactics and strategy for leading from positions of authority. But the second big advantage of distinguishing leadership from power and position is that you can begin to think about what does it take to lead without any authority. Because there are actually advantages. You can annoy people, and there's much less at stake. You can focus on a single issue, because you don't have people expecting you to carry the water on 20 different issues. That's an enormous resource. Think of what a resource it was for people in the civil rights movement to be able to focus on civil rights. One of Martin Luther King's, probably I would say, others would disagree, strategic mistakes was that he took on the Vietnam War. And by taking on the Vietnam War, he split his own constituency. All of a sudden, a lot of people who were with him on civil rights began to say, well, wait a second, but I'm not with you on Vietnam. But he needed the coherence of his constituency to get done what he wanted to get done. And maintaining that focus on a single issue, whatever that issue is for you, that you want to move forward. And maybe it's one of these three that you're going to be exploring today, is the real opportunity and benefit that you get from leading without authority. As a person who's just a citizen, leading laterally with the people close at hand. But the third benefit of distinguishing leadership from authority, and this is a real challenge to you. The real benefit, a third benefit, a key benefit, is that we can begin to examine the virtues of authority in and of itself, distinct from leadership. Frequently when I suggest to people that leadership and authority are two different things, they make leadership the good stuff and authority the bad stuff. And I think we tend to do that for very good reason. Nearly everybody I've ever worked with has scars on their back from the times when authorities were untrustworthy, when authorities violated the inherent trust that came with their power. And that violation of trust is so searing, it's so disturbing, it's so damaging, that people then develop a basic cynicism or distrust or caution about authority relationships. And then that leads to a whole chain reaction, a whole chain of counterproductive and sometimes self-destructive behaviors, as the distrust leads to reacting to authorities with distrust. And then the authority picks up the distrust, and then they don't like being treated with distrust or disrespect. And so that it escalates. So one of the virtues of distinguishing leadership from authority is to suggest to you that one of the critical challenges facing our society is to rehabilitate and renew our human capacity to trust again. Because the trust has been violated, and it's getting violated every day. And that's true. And that may get a lot better in your lifetime, but it isn't going to get perfect even in your lifetime. So how to operate with trust even when there are a lot of reasons to distrust? That takes a lot of guts. But why is it so important? You know, we could talk at the abstract philosophical level. One guy won the Nobel Prize in economics for writing about how an economic system can't function without trust. Because, you know, if you go downstairs and you spend $1.50 for a cup of coffee or an orange or banana or some fruit, you have to trust an awful lot of people. You have to trust all the people who grew that food. You have to trust that nobody's poisoned it on the way. You have to trust that it was cleaned before it's being sold in the cafeteria. You know, trust is like the hidden, magic ingredient that lubricates all human relationships in a functioning community. And if you think about it hard, go back to when you were just a kid, we human beings were designed to trust. We are designed to be social creatures. Evolution God designed us to live in community. Not all animals are like that. A lot of animals are born or hatched. They live their whole life alone. But we're designed, along with some animals, to live in groups. So when we're born helpless. Now, how many of you have ever held a baby? And so you hold the baby and it just melts in your chest. I mean, it just trusts. And it keeps trusting. And this baby, it fixes on your face if you're the mom, or you're the aunt, or you're the sister, or you're the dad. It fixes on your face. Every time that baby needs something, every time that baby's got a problem, it needs some direction for food. It needs some protection from Big Brother. It needs some order, Well, where am I supposed to go? It turns to that face, and it trusts that face. So from the moment we're born, we're really designed to trust authorities. And the authorities that we are initially designed to trust are our mother or father, our elders. And if we're really lucky, we've had a trustworthy parent, one that hasn't violated that trust. That's not always the case. Some of the kids who have the toughest time, they were born to trust, but they got scarred up young because their parents weren't trustworthy to the task. They were drinking too much, they were yelling too much, they were hitting too much, they were touching too much. In one way or another, the parent was overwhelmed and didn't quite know how to do that job, didn't have the supports around them to keep them straight in that job. So the child grows up with scar tissue around trust. Now, some of us come from cultures where the trust becomes part of the culture. I'm Jewish. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. She was born in 1925. She just died a couple of months ago at 90. When she was 12 years old, she was fortunate enough to be able to escape because my grandmother, who was a great lady, sort of saw the writing on the wall and began to plan their escape in 1933 when Hitler came to power, and by 1938, they got a visa to the United States. They came to Chicago. Well, it's part of the Jewish culture you trust your family. You trust maybe your village, but you can't trust those authorities because they've been untrustworthy for most of 2,000 years. And it kind of becomes part of your culture. And there are a lot of cultures around the world. If you visit any culture that was colonized for a few hundred years, the distrust of authority has become enculturated. I was just working in Greece on the crisis. The Greek culture has a culture of distrust. People only trust their village, their family, but not the government. So in a culture of distrust, it's very hard to build a modern economy. It's very hard for people to make it in new ways, to discover new opportunity, because that discovery requires trust in a lot of people rather than being really skeptical about them. But trust, of course, is risky. And what I'm suggesting is that a policy of trust as a basic orientation to life is going to hurt you, but it's going to hurt you less than a policy of distrust. And helping people who've been scarred up, your friends, your families, your neighbors, recover their capacity to trust, that innocence that they once had as kids, when they desperately wanted to be able to trust an elder, when they still do. Recovering that capacity for trust in people can only be done one-on-one, working with people, and then yourself being trustworthy as you begin to gain authority in people's eyes, and you learn how not to abuse that authority, and you model for people, trust is possible. Yeah, it's risky. Yeah, sometimes you're going to get burned. But on average, overall, as a life strategy, it'll produce more opportunity, more openings, wonderful surprises. Wow, I never thought I could trust that person, and look how they delivered. There's a term in the Jewish community called Jewish insurance. You expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed. What I'm suggesting is that's a bad attitude. Many of you have been the lucky ones. That's not to say you don't have your own scar tissue. I'm sure you do. But you've also gotten here somehow. A lot of blessing. Somebody believed in you at a critical moment. Opportunity, a teacher, a parent, an uncle, an aunt, a grandmother. Somebody bet on you so that you got to sit in this room today. That's a real blessing. It's easy to imagine that it's because you've got the right stuff or because you're amazing. Well, I think you all probably are amazing, and I think if I got to know you, I'd be amazed by you and by your journey. But we're all really blessed, and there are a lot of people who struggle with a lot of the problems that you see in your families and friendship communities and schools and neighborhoods that haven't recovered from the scars, haven't been able to maintain that innocence, that maybe it can be good for me. So over the course of the day, your job is to think about what opportunity for leadership lies ahead for you in micro days, microscopic ways, next week, next month, to be helping policymakers here think at scale, because that's what they're here to do. But to think about what partnership can you provide from being on the ground, from being in that cohort of people, that community of people, to turn people on so that they can trust and then begin to discover the opportunities in themselves and in the world around them. May the force be with you. Any questions? We have a couple of minutes. Yes.
Hello, Professor.
Hi.
First, I just want to say I'm truly sorry for the loss of your mother. Surely she was an extraordinary woman.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she was a great lady. She had a joyful life. She was
That's awesome.
one of the lucky ones, yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, my name is Darius Williams. I'm a student at Wake Forest University, and it's my absolute honor to be here and to kind of hear your expertise in this topic that I'm extremely passionate about, which is leadership.
Yes.
As well, to kind of pick your mind right now. And
Yes.
so I have a question. So you stated some things, both in your reading as well as just in your speech. You stated adaptive challenges or challenges which people are the problem. You also stated that to act outside, this is in your reading, to act outside the narrow confines of your job description is essentially the heart of leadership, which will come with its own dangers such as resistance and rebuke, etc. And I just wanted to kind of gauge you, because when I hear and read these statements, I cannot help but think about this aspect of privilege. I think this is something that
Yes.
kind of penetrates every aspect of our society.
Yes.
And there are different levels of privilege, like this moment right here, to be able to talk with someone from the Harvard Kennedy School, a place where I hope to attend one day. It's an extraordinary privilege. but there are different levels. And so when I think about the systemic and real issues here in America,
Yes.
there's a certain privilege that seems to be embodied by that.
Yes.
Particularly by a certain type of person, which is white, heterosexual, cisgendered male.
Yes. Guys like me.
But I just wanted to kind of gauge this. So I didn't really hear this or see this in the reading, is this intersectionality of privilege and this idea of adaptive leadership. And so I just wanted to pick your mind a little bit and just try to see, through your expertise, how have you tackled this intersectionality of privilege in America with your own work?
Yes. Well, I began to do it just now by suggesting that none of us with privilege
Yeah.
got here only on our own steam. And that means the people who didn't get here, it's not just their fault.
Absolutely.
You know, we are really lucky. We've been born into a right moment, a particular family, parachuted into a particular classroom. You know, a lot of it's just, and sure, we at agency, we see some of those opportunities, you know, and we ought to take a lot of pride in that. I think the problem with privilege is that people think they deserved it. And what I'm trying to suggest is none of us actually deserve it. That's why I say it's a blessing. None of us actually deserve what we have gotten. We didn't deserve the brain we're born with. Some of you are born with a particularly good brain for art or math or science or literature. You know, I didn't deserve to get to be born into a family where my father was a brain surgeon. You know, I mean, so what did I earn, and what was a matter of the luck of the draw? And I think part of getting people with privilege to really take that in is to realize, wait a second, there are conditions that have determined my success. It's not just me being proud. Hell, if I did it, then you should be able to do it. That's kind of the illusion of American individualism. If I can do it, you can do it. But wait a second, I did it because there was a lot of we's around me that enabled me to do that. And identifying that and getting people to see that actually it's the larger context that creates the conditions for opportunity is a big shift in the mindset for the privileged set.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yes.
Good morning.
Hi.
This is awkward. I had a simple question. So what I've seen throughout my life, and I've seen other places, is it's always leadership to a certain extent. So we'll let you be a leader, we'll let you do this, that, and other until it's inconvenient for us to do this. Talking about people are greater than, your circumstance. So how do you overcome that obstacle to being a leader when other people are only letting you be a leader within this box that they give you, this, you get what I'm saying?
That's a great question, and I think that's why I introduced this idea that leadership and authority aren't the same. Because I think really if you unpackage what you say, what you're saying is that people will give you a certain grant of authority. And they'll say, this is what you're authorized to do. I'll give you some power and resources. I trust you, but these are the services I want you to do. And I don't want you to go beyond the water's edge. Like, this is what I want you to do. I don't want you to do more than that. That's what you're authorized to do. And what you're saying is sometimes leadership requires going beyond your authority, going beyond the job description. So how do you do that and stay alive? That's the question. It's a dangerous enterprise to go begin to cross the boundary of your authority. And I think there are multiple ways to think about it, and I think that you're going to break into groups right now, and one of the questions you can ask the smaller group and the teaching fellows, who are all professionals and very experienced people, but they know we've worked together for a long time. They can help you think on that question in concrete ways. And my books try to address that question. So I can't do justice to your question standing on one foot. except to say that there are ways to lead and stay alive, but it requires thinking carefully about the context you're in. Who are you disappointing? At what rate can you disappoint them? You know, how are you gonna hold them tight through that process? What kind of compassion will you have for the disturbance you're going to generate in their lives? I mean, leadership requires a lot of curiosity and compassion, because you really got to understand what you're asking people to give up when you're asking them to change a piece of their identity, whatever that identity is. So, you know, once you begin to go beyond your job description, you got to scan the environment and begin to understand what's at stake for the people that I'm about to disturb, and then how do I frame and take action and sequence and pace, break down, you know, these challenges so that I take into account the pains of change I'm asking people to sustain, and I manage that learning process that I'm asking them to engage in.
Oh, my name is Dwayne Bond Jr., by the way, and thank you.
It's great to meet you, Dwayne.
You too.
Take care. Good luck to you. Thank you all.
So, you've had a chance to hear an amazing set of ideas. And now we have a chance to work together to move into thinking about how they fit with your lives and the work that you are already doing, and that, as Ms. Jarrett mentioned, we hope you will take on going forward. We do have 5 teaching fellows who are joining us from various places. I'd like them each to stand up so you can see them. Yes? Okay, well, they'll stand up all at once. That's terrific. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move from this room into the small group discussions. You see on the agenda that there's groups are listed by alphabetical letters, and if you check your name badge, you'll see that your name badge has a letter. So what we're going to do now is bring this part of the morning to a close, and we'll ask you to move from this room to the room number that's listed after your group, and you'll be with that group for about an hour, and then we'll come back together for lunch. Okay? So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you back here in this room in about an hour.